This is The Change Physician, episode 154.
Hey folks, welcome back to another episode of The Change Physician. This is your host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, with my Amazeballs co-host, Miss Amazeballs herself, or I should say Dr. Amazeballs herself, Melissa Cady. Melissa, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I was thinking of a dab for DAB, Dr. Amazeballs. Do a dab.
How do you do the dab thing? That was a long time ago.
I don't know how to do that dab thing.
It's something with your head goes down. Yeah, whatever.
Down like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Little dab will do you.
Little dab will do you.
Dr. Amazeballs.
All right. So for today's episode, we just had talked with Dr. Bill Lear, physician, scientist, entrepreneur extraordinaire. And as we let our guests know, we do tell them this, folks, we're not doing this directly behind their back. I mean, we're behind their back. But now we're going to talk about him behind his back and some of the takeaways we had. And this is going to be pretty easy for, at least for me, because I took a lot of notes. In fact, you know what this is one of the things I'll talk about with Dr. Bill Lear. So a couple things just to kind of remind us, 153 or 152 and 153, where Bill Lear in 152 told his physician story from training in Canada, kind of his experiences leading up to medical school, going into emergency, then ultimately why he chose derm and being a Mohs surgeon, and how that kind of led into their current company, which is Suturegard. 153 was specifically about the Suturegard journey, where they kind of just talked about the problem that Suturegard solves. If you are interested in entrepreneurship, that's not a super long episode, but there are a couple key pieces in it that I would go and listen to about 50 times, because if you forget the problem that you are trying to solve, your business is not going to do well. So anyway, those were the two episodes there. And like I said, I almost derailed them both multiple times because we kept hitting these things. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much we can discuss about this. Oh my, there's so much we can discuss about that. There was such a depth there. And, you know, as I said, he's my neighbor, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff about him, about how amazing he is. So it was a fun episode. So yeah. How about you?
Oh, it was great. Obviously I take notes, but then I create notes because, I like to go through and edit out and make some trailers and whatnot. So I think what was interesting is his strong conviction of learning in a way that's not passive, a very active engagement type of learning. And I think he's demonstrated that throughout his life. And even always asking the question why, and trying to derive some level of evidence to, make sure it's just not some belief. But he's had so much research before he even went into medical school. And so I think that's followed him along the way and served him well and sets him apart from many of the other, as you said in one of our Saturday salutations, it sets him apart from some other companies in the sense that trying to make sure that what he is selling or the solution he's creating is based on a real problem, but with some solid evidence behind it.
Yeah, that actually, that was the first notes I think I took, was about learning.
Yeah.
And I think learning is such a fascinating topic to me, because I always did well. I was a good test taker. I just was always very good at tests. But I didn't really understand what learning was until I was, I just say 38. Now, I did not go to medical school late. So that was after medical school, that was after residency, that was after fellowship, that I didn't really understand what the principles about learning are, which is really, what's the topic? Why is this topic important? How is it applied? Where else can it be applied? And you're learning sort of this full dimension rather than what does methylene blue do in the body, right? Something like that, like the simple rote memorization thing. And it was really, really early in Bill's discussion, he talked about this almost Socratic questioning that he was doing like in high school. And I was like, and I wanted to ask this so bad.
Where'd that come from?
Exactly. Where did that come from? And he said he had, this will actually lead to another part, but there's people that will find principles, like you learn them, but the easier way to do it is you actually see or hear, or someone encourages you. That's a deep learning principle. And so I really wanted to ask, but I was scared that we would totally get off topic. Is exactly that is where did you learn this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, because you can see that theme continued through the episode of learning to learn and apply and understand, not learning so you can vomit forth minutia. I'm really good at vomiting forth minutia, by the way. But it's not useful.
Yeah.
Really want to learn to understand. And that came through over and over again. With that, and I want to make a point before I forget, kind of move it over a little bit, topics about exposure. So the other thing I found really fascinating is he's a Newfie. He was born and raised in Newfoundland. And apparently, we're not Canadian, but Canadians make fun of, he always talks about how Canadians must make fun of Newfoundland. So
yeah,
that must be true. And so when you're coming from a pretty rural place, your exposure as a child is really critical. And we've talked about this on Saturday Salutations and previous episodes when we're talking about cognitive biases in these perceptual fields and how people, well, those persons should have known better. And if you've never been exposed to something, it makes it very, very difficult for you to align your choices and beliefs and to meet potential, right? And we've talked about that in personal, like inequities in life. Mm-hmm. So he's coming from this location, and it was very clear that he was exposed at an early age of people who were doing things. So Bill's life could have been very, very different if his father hadn't been a scientist and exposed him. And he said that. I looked at my father and I'm like, well, if he could do it, maybe there's something. And his, I think it was uncle that was a doctor. And so it reinforced to me the importance, just being aware of people's surroundings. For the listeners' takeaways is to be around people that kind of lift you up and provide that experience. Like, if you want to exceed or you want to get better in something, surround yourself with people who are doing that. And if you don't, if you're frustrated with your patients, it's the other side of this, and you're saying, well, why aren't they doing this? Get a little bit better, learn more about where they're coming from.
Right.
These people coming in that we often call them difficult patients or other horrible names. If you don't understand where they're coming from, you will have a very different lens of how you're approaching with them, and most likely is not in a humane fashion. People have different experiences. People have different environments that they're in, and just sort of imagine your own life. If you didn't have that mentor, or you didn't have that loved one, or you didn't have somebody in high school. There's someone I know specifically that had a high school teacher that they mentioned that just changed their life. So, just kind of think about that. And it just resonated very quickly, in Dr. Lear's story about you're in this location, but you still have an example of people who have done more, who've exceeded more than maybe other people. If all Canada is making fun of Newfoundland, he had other people, at least that were Newfies, that were doing things that were amazing, that he said, hey, I can do it too. That's a really, really powerful belief, and particularly a powerful belief to develop at a young age.
Yeah. And back in those days without the social media exposure, I think that's even more profound. Funny thing is this Newfies thing, I never heard that before. I would have probably said Newfoundland instead of Newfoundland. It's just not part of my vernacular. I guess that's a word for it. It's just not something I think about, that place way out there. It's just, I'm like, I never met anyone from there. This is the first, I guess, that I know of.
I think I know two people now.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. I'm almost positive that another good friend of ours, that we met through a friend it was one of our medical school classmates, her husband, and it was his friend, who became our friends, but I'm almost they were Canadian, and I'm pretty sure he was from Newfoundland too.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Is
from Newfoundland. Yeah, he's still alive. He's not dead.
Gotcha.
They're not in Canada anymore. So
I think I used that word vernacular the wrong way.
It's okay. We'll let you.
The way you say the language is not anyway. I want to make sure I always check myself, because if a word comes out that I haven't used in a while, it may not be used in the right context. So scratch that. Yeah. So I first of all, I just want to say that it was kind of cool to meet someone from way up there. I don't think I could survive in that kind of cold. But no, I think, this whole exposure thing is huge in the sense that sometimes, even if there is social media out there, there's always that phrase of like, 5 people you spend the most time around, like, the influence they have. But it really is the kind of people around you where they put their focus or their attention, just like all these other things we talk about. Those are the things you focus on. It might be you're around 5 gamers all the time and they just game all the time. Like, you don't get exposed to some of these other possibilities in your life and don't even explore other things that might appeal to you. Were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to agree with that. It's the kind of the principle being, someone else said something about you never want to be the smartest person in the room.
Yeah.
Because then you're not going to learn.
Right.
But that is huge. Like, and this is not an elitist conversation in any way, shape, or form. It's not meant to be. Like, we know you can have friends across all different sectors, but depending on where you want to go, it is important that you at least have exposure to people who are doing interesting things.
That's how you expand your life.
How you expand your life. And I think the younger that you are, the more important it is when you're looking at potential. I've actually had talks with my kids about this already. I'm like, okay, well, what are they, you're in school and what are they doing? Oh, this person's doing some really cool stuff. You know what? Maybe you want to spend some more time with them. Mm-hmm. Because there's this, beliefs and expectations. We throw these words around so often, but the impact on them is frankly almost unbelievable when you start seeing the influence that they have on your day-to-day activities, your current experiences, and then your future, like what you actually strive to do. And those beliefs and expectations are heavily influenced by the people around you. Mm-hmm. So, I don't want to get off topic from the deep dive on Bill, but it's very, very obvious that he had people around him that at least provided a molding or potential to develop a belief system that had high levels of expectations. High levels about expectations about, excellence in general. Again, the next time I see him, I'm going to ask him about that, the learning thing, because the learning, like, most people don't just randomly come up with, oh, I want to learn to understand. And part of it may have been when he was building computers and teaching himself how to code, and, because he wanted to apply something and he didn't have it. So he had to actually teach himself to do it. Right. But those beliefs and expectations that I can do it, I can learn. If I know this is better. If I'm around, if this person did a medical device company, I can make it maybe a medical device company. Those are small little interactions that can get downplayed, that are really, really important if you're trying to get into a certain place. Like, if you want to design a medical equipment thing, probably need to be exposed a little bit to people making medical device companies. Yeah,
you make me think about this. It's not specific to Bill, but there is a certain level within him that I sense of this belief in himself that he's capable of learning, not just learning, like how we're talking about, but this inner belief that he just believes in himself, that he's capable either learning something, doing something. And I think that gets pushed under the rug a lot of times, that people overlook that there are people out there that, and any of us as humans can do it, but sometimes it's a bad habit, or a bad, it kind of feeds on itself in a negative way, where you are averse to taking the risk of something you feel like you're not going to be good enough at, or you're not willing to try it, or whatever doubts that you might have. But I find that sometimes it feeds off itself in a positive or negative way. Like, he obviously started off in a positive route where it kept building and building, and he kept trying more things, and it kept going, and there's no stopping him. But I find that there are people out there that they don't take those little steps and put themselves around to build the confidence, so they get the confidence to do the thing that they thought they could do. Instead, they keep kind of making the world smaller. Mm-hmm. So he just expands it because of the confidence he has. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, 2 things. The first one is, I think in many ways that's like the core difference between like a fixed and growth mindset. We've talked about fixed and growth mindsets before, and the importance of education, and Carol Dweck's research around fixed versus growth. that also makes me think, I'm trying to think of I'm going to lose one of my points here because this also kind of revolves around, a lot of people can quote, they know about growth mindset and, oh yeah, I know about the growth mindset, but you just know the name growth mindset, or do you understand what that means for a growth mindset? Richard Feynman, the physicist, used to say the name of a thing does not mean you understand the thing. I'm kind of paraphrasing it. You don't, and people, this is of course sort of the difference in the memorization versus the understanding. Like you can say the name of the disease, but do you understand the physiology of the disease? Do you understand how that impacts other things? And with fixed and growth mindset, it's the same thing. We use and bandy these terms a lot, and it's kind of in the pop culture, and even the kids are getting exposed to it, but people aren't embodying it because they don't truly understand what that means. Right. And Bill, even in the episode, he said, "Hey, I'm not the," I don't remember about it. I mean, he's a smart dude, no matter what he says, but I'm not the smartest or the strongest or whatever. But what he said is that I have perseverance. Mm-hmm. He can work. Yeah. And that's sort of like the core to a growth mindset, is understanding that if I put the effort in, I'm going to get benefit back. It is not about inherent ability. And from a societal standpoint, I think this comes back quite often, is there's a lot of people, I'm bad at math, I'm not good at this. And we all say it, but unfortunately, some of us actually believe it. I mean, there's, we believe that we're bad in something rather than, I have the possibility to grow and improve. And if we believe we're good in something, people say, well, that's fine. Well, no, because if you actually believe it's an inherent ability, you actually work less towards that, because if you fail, then it's a reflection on who you are as your core. Oh, I'm not smart because I failed that test. Oh, I'm not going to do that anymore because that reveals things I don't want to know, versus, I failed that test. It means I didn't work hard enough. Where can I improve? So really, that was a key piece in there.
Yeah, the thing you said earlier about you can know the word, you don't really necessarily know. I was like, well, I might know Kevin, but do I really know Kevin? Is what I mean, there is a difference. There
is a difference, and we actually should do an episode on that sometime, because there's a beautiful quote that Feynman did, and it comes up again and again, and it's frustrating when people parrot a word back, mm-hmm. but they don't actually understand what they're talking about, and it's pretty clear. And kind of taking it back to what Bill was saying is, he was like, so when we went through his journey, and then we start going into the Suturegard, and we're seeing this problem around wound dehiscence, and stuff that Steph didn't talk about. He's a derm and he's a Mohs surgeon, but we didn't talk about, surgeons may not consider Mohs surgeons to be surgeons because they didn't do a surgical fellowship. And also, well, they actually know more about the dermis than you do, because that's their entire specialty, and the dermis is what you close, right? But and when he mentioned, we like to think we're scientists as doctors, and we are not. Medical school is not science. It's predominantly has been regurgitation. And so, like, I have a couple things that I wrote down. Was dogma versus knowledge is one. Dogma is something because your attending told you, or your attending's attending told them. And then we get these set stuff routine that comes down as, that's just the way it is. And
see one, do one, teach one.
See one, and that's a great way to do experiential learning. But before you see and do one, you should see one, and then you should question, why are we doing what we're doing? What is the physiology behind this? How does this work? What would the alternative pathways be? What are different ways it can be better? What can different ways be worse? What was the original intent? I mean, that was the other thing that just blew my mind. You know me, I like pull up words and I want to know what the etymology is. What is the root of the word? Because if I can look at the root of the word, it provides this foundation that we can then really truly understand what that word means. Mm-hmm. Bill was talking about, well, what is the root? Why were these studies, the original study, and I just love it, pulling the original studies on like suturing, and then finding out there was only 5 or actually 3, I think, after you kind of wheedle them all out, to see why they did what they did, and it's that foundational knowledge. He called it first principle thinking, which comes, I think that's from Aristotle or something. I've never heard that term, but I was looking for it. It's the core. Like, what is the roots, the truths that are known? And a lot of people like Elon Musk talk about first principle thinking. where what is what is this root, the core of what is known, what is the core of truth? And then once you kind of understand those core principles, the first principles, then you can start building from there.
Mhm.
And that is not the same thing as doing what you're attended told, or we've always done this. And in medicine, it's, it's so rampant, like all this crap that we do
Mhm.
that really we have not studied. And people say, oh, I know this is the right thing to do. And you can find it come up a lot when they're like someone will actually take the time to study it. And they say, well, this doesn't look to be that way. And they'll throw up, how dare you say that the annual physical doesn't do any benefit and is just a time wasting and taking. Well, how much of that is your belief system that it does a lot versus the published data?
Mhm.
And if you don't, your first step then is to counter and then design a good study to counter that. Based on the second part about that dogma versus knowledge was the incestuous citation that he was most mentioning. So when he went back and was looking at what were the first principles about search, or what were the first kind of studies and why were they studies on suturing technology and wound approximation? And he found this sort of incestuous nature where the same 5 studies were being quoted over and over and over again. And I forgot what he said, like 2 of them weren't really studies and 3, whatever. That made me think of pain.
Yes.
Whatever specialty you are in, folks, go back and like find it. If there's something that's being widely quoted, go and read it first of all.
Yeah.
But it is shocking because when I was at University of Chicago and I was doing research, this is funny because people know I'm not an opioid fan. Like, I don't believe in chronic opioids for a number of different reasons. Huh?
Yeah, the 1% addicted, JIC, and whatever.
Porter and JIC, right? And
Yes.
my mentor, we were doing research on how pain actually was supposed to protect you from addiction, which is not true at all.
Mhm.
And he's like, pull up the study because everybody's everybody was quoting this one paper. And like, Bill was saying, well, sometimes we'll just look at the abstract and think that that's what the paper says. And that happens all the time.
Mhm.
This wasn't even a paper. It was literally a paragraph this long.
Yeah.
And everybody was quoting it, and it was, and then there's 3 others that I won't get into that were very similar, that were just absolute junk when you read them. And I love my mentor. He was so good about it. He's like, we can't use that. Like, someone else said, well, everybody else is quoting it, we'll do it. We can't use that. So so I love that little kind of there is this incestuousness where people see someone else quotes a paper, and then someone else will quote this paper, and then we move into the dogma world.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that Bill is not into incest and he's not into dogma. So Bill, love you.
Yeah. And then it gets even worse with the telephone game where it just keeps getting twisted and misinterpreted.
Yeah.
And the end of what they're saying doesn't even reflect back on the original.
Yeah.
We don't need any more of that. We got plenty of that. There's plenty of journals putting crap studies out anyway. So yeah.
Well, that kind of comes down to the goal of, are you trying to get just published so you can get published, or are you publishing because you actually are trying to solve a problem?
Exactly.
Yeah. So what else did you have?
I think we covered some of the big ones, the dogma and the love for learning. And I learned a few things too, just like, the whole deep suture idea, the belief in that. And I, work with surgeons all the time that do that stuff. I'm definitely going to be sharing. He opened my eyes to maybe consider sharing and maybe questioning the beliefs of some people I work with, for the benefit of, patients. Maybe, some of these will have some better outcomes, but no, I just really, I enjoyed his enthusiasm and his dedication. And what was the words he said? You said persevere. Oh, dogged perseverance. Yeah, dogged perseverance. So yeah, no, I thought that was, I love what he's doing. I think we could take some of these things into another direction, as far as some of the things that he's, even the education that he does for other people. That was an interesting story.
Oh, the ACGME part.
Yeah. Yes.
That was not surprising.
No.
And you guys remember in the episode, he talks about his experiences when they were creating an ACGME, I think, residency, and then made a fellowship with it for dermatology. And and rightly so, or with the fellows or the residents, you're like expecting them to present. So he actually designed the curriculum so that 80% of the lectures are being delivered by the students, which is an active and engaged way that they're going to learn, they're going to understand, they're going to deliver it, they're having the discussions. It is a much deeper style of learning. And then ACGME comes in, and ACGME is the educational organization behind like medical residencies and fellowships and stuff. And there's a lot of controversy, but they're like, well, you have to have 80% of your lectures delivered by the attendings. And that kind of brought it up, because it's like, why, right? What's the data? Well, that's just the way it is. And I think I even said in that, that infuriates me. Yeah. Like it absolutely, and I wasn't ever that way. Like again, that the 38 sort of transition point. If you believe, that's fine. Then you state it as a belief. With the recognition, the next step then should be is to find the facts and evidence for actual facts and actual evidence, so that you actually understand the principle behind it and you have data to support it. And it is extremely important for medicine, I think, that we may have a belief or an opinion, but then we look at the evidence in what it says. Mm-hmm. And so much of what we do in medicine is we practice by anecdote, contrary to existing evidence, versus how it should be, where we practice potentially by anecdote, supported by current evidence. And when evidence starts to change, we start looking and seeing how that aligns, as long as, again, understanding the basics of what the key problem is to begin with. What are those first principles? What is the core knowledge about the wound in this case? What is it about pain for people who maybe are a little bit more interested in that kind of topic? But don't ever just tell me, oh, that's what it's my opinion. Like, oh, and then because they're ACGME, you have this. It just makes me so mad. Like they're the ones who should be having the evidence. And you know, I don't know. It just pisses me off when you have these organizations and institutions that actually aren't really trying to improve, instead are practicing by dogma, and then making everybody else do it by dogma because they're too scared to actually change how they do things.
Yeah, well, that's why you need the leadership to change the tune, change course, but you need the support of all the people at that level, because otherwise it seems like, you know, it's always a trickle down effect too.
You can't get in the leadership position, right? So the people, I mean, this is outside of Bill's episode, but for when you're looking at institutional change, to get to the positions where you can do this sort of top-down change behavior, you have to get through all the layers of the people who are in front of you, who often have groupthink and aren't interested in improving because they find it threatening to them.
Right.
So you know, yeah.
How
do you change it?
Yeah.
How are you supposed to change this stuff?
Right. And you can't make it clear that you're trying to change over everything. Like it's almost like you got to get to the top without them perceiving a threat. And then you do the shift, but then you got to have buy-in. So it's not easy.
No, it isn't. And it would be just so much easier if people were like, hey, okay, I know the difference between a belief and a fact, and I'm willing to let my, you know, beliefs should never be rigid. They should be flexible. Values can be rigid. I think this was from Adam Grant in one of his books, where he's like, you know, values are things beliefs are things you think are true. Values are things that are important to you, right? And so you want actually flexible beliefs, but very firm values, because your beliefs should change, but your values, if you believe in truth or equity or safety or whatever, those can be expressed in very many different ways. But if you bind them up in this kind of core, these rigid beliefs that aren't willing to flex and bend, everything gets kind of tarnished by that. But
yeah, I think the core value of truth, we're definitely willing to change beliefs, as hard as it might be, when we recognize that what we thought was the truth is not the truth.
And that was hard. Like, and I think everybody would, yeah. Anyway, so go back to Bill. It didn't sound like he ever had that problem, because he started.
No, I think he stays true. That's the one. I think we can kind of bring it to a close there, because that's a segue to say that I think we all have underlying core truth, and we mentioned it in the episode that truth is what we seek. It's best for our patients. It's best for us. We could be patients one day. So I think, I think I think you want me to take it into a close here. Or do you have any
Take
last
it into a close there,
Okay.
Dab,
Well,
Dr. Dab.
that's right. We'll dabble to you. Thank you for joining us in the Change Physician. I'm Melissa Cady, the Challenge Doctor, with my co-host, Dr. Kevin Cuccaro, and just finishing off our chat and deep dive into our awesome conversations with Dr. Bill Lear. We appreciate him being on the Change Physician podcast. If you or someone you would like to spotlight is doing some amazing things in their own career as a physician, we'd love to hear from you and spotlight them for you. And if you don't know what the Change Physician is all about, you can go to the community at thechangephysician.com. Join whether you're a physician or a physician ally. We'd love to see you there. We're also on Instagram, and occasionally we'll have some posts on LinkedIn, including probably this episode. And of course, all the venues for our podcasts, you can find us on the major iTunes, etc. And we'd love to see you there as well. So until next time, take care.
Stay well, folks.